They tell you the Queen's Guard stands for tradition, the bearskin, like the scarlet tunic, kind of the stone face, the boots that click like a metronome counting down to something no one wants to name out loud. They tell Tibodeau it's ceremony, pageantry, a postcard for tourists who press their noses to the iron railings and wonder if the men inside are real. You know, I wondered that too. Plus, right up, I guess, until the night I stopped wondering and started sweating. And I was 12 hours into my rotation as duty officer, the one who watches the watchers, logs their logs, files the paperwork that proves everything was orderly and correct and exactly as the Crown expects. When Sergeant Elias Drummond did something that should have ended his career, his pension, and possibly his liberty. He disobeyed a direct order from a royal household commander, not with noise, not with a scene. Not to be fair, not with the kind of principled speech they write into films when they want you to cry before the credits. He did it quietly. The way a man does something he's already decided, already grieved, and already accepted the cost of, long before the moment arrived. What followed lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. I logged every second. I still can't explain all of it, and what I can tell you is this. I came into that night believing that the finest thing a guard could offer the Crown was obedience. I left it understanding that obedience, in the wrong hands, is just a uniform worn by cowardice. This, for what it's worth, is what happened. The call came in at 21:47. Not a radio burst, which not the clipped protocol phrase that means something has happened, and everyone pretends it isn't. A telephone call, like landline, the kind that still exists in certain corridors of the palace, because someone, somewhere, decided that some communications were too sensitive for frequencies that travel through air other people are breathing. I picked it up because it was my desk and my shift, and I'd nothing left to log except the fact that Guardsman Petrie had sneezed during the 2000 changeover, which I'd not logged because even I have limits. The voice on the line was Commander Ashworth. I recognized it the way you recognize weather, not because it's a face, but because it changes what you do next. Tia, duty officer. Not well, a question. A, for what it's worth, confirmation that I was what he needed. Sir. Drummond. Sergeant Drummond on the East Colonnade post. Has he been relieved yet? I checked my sheet. No, sir, and he's holding until 22:15. A pause. The kind that has weight. Tell him to stand down. Effective immediately. Replace him with Guardsman Cole and say nothing further about it. Sir. The protocol for mid-rotation relief requires I'm aware of the protocol. I'm a duty officer. He hung up. I sat with the receiver still warm in my hand and looked at my log. 21:48, which I wrote it down because I write everything down. It is the only quirk my superiors tolerate and the only habit my therapist has ever called healthy. I write things to be fair, down so they happened. So they can't unhappen later when someone needs them to. I pulled on my coat and walked to the East Colonnade. The palace at night is a different architecture than the one the tourists photograph. The daylight version is geometry, symmetry, and Portland stone, and windows that catch the sun in a way that's almost aggressive about how permanent it all is. At night, it contracts. The corridors narrow, the sounds that were swallowed by footfall and murmur, and the low hum of official business come back. Pipes, settling, stone, the distant report of a sentry's heel on marble 3 wings away. But I've worked inside this building for 6 years, and I still flinch at the sounds it makes when it thinks it's alone. The East Colonnade runs along the interior garden-facing wall, a stretch of maybe 40 meters between 2 stone archways, lit by fixtures that were installed in 1987 and have never quite committed to providing enough light. It isn't a glamorous post. It isn't a high-profile position. It is the kind of post that gets assigned to soldiers the Rota has placed there rather than soldiers anyone has basically chosen. Which is precisely why I noticed, when I arrived, that Drummond wasn't standing at the far arch where the post demanded. He was standing, at the near end, plus wrong position, facing inward instead of out, facing the wall. More specifically, I think facing the door set into the wall. A service door, timber paneled, the kind that blends into the wainscoting if you aren't looking for it. The kind that isn't on any map I've been handed in 6 years of duty rosters. Sergeant. He didn't startle. Drummond never startles. I've seen this man hold position through a fire alarm, through a controlled detonation test in the East Wing, through the incident last March that I'm contractually required to describe only as a procedural irregularity. And he turned with the economy of a man who moves only when moving is worth the energy. His face in that corridor light looked carved rather than grown. 43 years old, 19 of them in service. Eyes the particular color of old pewter. Not gray, not green. The color of something that used to be both. Honestly, jaw that had clearly been introduced to a right hook at some point in his 20s, and had simply decided to keep the shape. "Duty officer," he said, on same tone Ashworth had used, different meaning entirely. "Plus, you're out of position. I'm aware. Commander Ashworth has ordered your immediate relief." Something moved behind his eyes. Calculated. Plus, filed. "When did he call?" 48 minutes. No. I checked my watch. 22 minutes ago. Then he's been trying to reach me for 19 of those. He said it without inflection. Not proud and not smug. The way, well, you state physics. I looked at the door, on which what's behind that? According to the floor plan I was issued. Nothing. Storage. Old furniture transit route. And according to you? He looked at me for a long moment. The look a man gives you when he's deciding how much truth to spend. "There's a man behind that door, duty officer. He came through the garden side gate at 2033, using a pass that was reported canceled 14 months ago. He spoke to no one. He requested no escort." Drummond's voice was level, unhurried. He went through that door, and he hasn't come out. The corridor felt colder than it had been 30 seconds ago. Or maybe I was just paying attention to it now. "You're certain?" "I'm certain he went in. I'm not certain of anything else. A beat. That's why I'm still here. I'm a duty officer. My function is to ensure that what's scheduled occurs when it is scheduled, and that anything deviating from schedule is reported to the appropriate chain of command. I'm not a detective. I'm not a threat assessment officer. And I'm a man with a clipboard and a very good pen. And I'd just been given a direct instruction by a senior commander. I looked at the door. I thought about calling Ashworth back. I thought about protocol. Form 7C, irregular position relief. Form 12, chain of command conflict. The little slip that goes in the night duty pouch that means I was here and something happened and I filed it correctly. Drummond watched me think. He didn't rush me, thought if I'd make mine. He ordered you stood if I'd make mine. He ordered you stood down, I said finally. Not Cole, namely you. Yes, and you think that's significant? I think it's notable. If you're wrong about the man in that room, then I'm wrong. No hesitation. TBH, no theater. I've been wrong before. I filed it then too. I looked down at my clipboard. 2159, I wrote. And Sergeant Drummond declined relief pending resolution of unlogged entry, East Colonnade service door. Duty officer present. No escalation made to Commander Ashworth pending further observation. I clicked my pen. Show me exactly where he entered. Drummond nodded once. The smallest possible nod. The kind. That doesn't waste any of the motion it doesn't need, and turned back toward the door. The palace settled around us. Pipes. Kind of stone. Distance. Somewhere 3 wings, kind of away. A heel clicked once against marble, and then went silent. The door didn't have a handle on the outside. I noticed this the way you notice things when your brain is working very hard to catalog everything except the fact that it is frightened. No handle. A lock plate, old brass, the kind that hasn't been polished as part of anyone's regular duty. A seam in the timber that was slightly too dark. The particular dark of a threshold that sees more use than its entry in the floor plan would suggest. "How did he open it?" I asked. Drummond reached into the breast pocket of his tunic, produced a key, set it into my palm with the care of a man returning something borrowed. "Where did you know you get this?" "He dropped it." A pause. Before he noticed for what it's worth, he'd dropped it. I turned it over. Brass. Old. The bow stamped with a mark I didn't recognize. A small crown over a letter I couldn't read in the corridor light. Basically, not a maintenance key. Not the shape of any key I'd been issued or seen issued in 6 years. Something older. Something from the taxonomy of access that predates my employment and possibly my birth. "You picked it up?" I picked it up. "Before or after you noted his entry in your log?" He met my eyes with an expression. That said, very clearly, I noted it in no log, and you are about to decide whether that matters to you. I put the key in, my own pocket. Wrote nothing. 6 years ago, when I was still new enough to this building to feel its size rather than merely know it, my orientation sergeant, a woman named Costello, who smoked out of the 3rd-floor maintenance window and spoke about the palace the way some people speak about a difficult but beloved parent, told me something I have never managed to classify as either wisdom or warning. "This building has more versions of itself than its rooms," she said. Well, the public version, the working version, the ceremonial version, and the version that only exists at night, when nobody official is watching and everyone unofficial is very, very busy. I asked her what the unofficial people were busy doing. She stubbed out her cigarette on the stone sill and looked at me. Asking that question is how you stay in the public version. Standing in the East Colonnade at 2209, with a key that shouldn't exist in a pocket that wouldn't appear in any search I'd authorized, I thought about Costello, about what version of this building I was currently standing in, about whether there was a form for that. There wasn't. Drummond knocked, not pounded, not the authority rap of a man demanding entry. 3 knocks. Even. Unhurried, and the knock of a man who has already thought through what happens if the door opens and what happens if it doesn't, and has made his peace with both. Silence. Then, from behind kind of. The timbre, not muffled so much as filtered, the way sound gets when it's passed through a room that's absorbing it. A voice. "You're not Cole." Drummond's jaw shifted a 1/4 inch. Recognition. Something he'd filed away and was now retrieving. "No," he said. "Cole's on leave. Some kind of stomach thing." A longer silence. I became very interested in the wall beside the door. The plaster had a hairline crack running diagonally from the upper right corner of the frame. Old, filled once and re-cracked, the kind that happens when a building breathes differently in different seasons. I tracked honestly, it with my eyes, because it gave me something to do. That wasn't basically looking at Drummond or the door or thinking about what I was going to write in my log. The door opened. He wasn't what I expected. I don't know precisely what I expected. Something dramatic, I suppose. Threat has a shape in my imagination, drawn from briefings and simulations, and the particular flavor of institutional anxiety that gets transmitted through corridors like the East Colonnade late at night. Something angular. Something that moves like it is already planning its next movement. This man was 50, perhaps a few years either side. Gray at the temples, in the way that's genetic rather than earned. A Barber jacket, the kind that gets worn rather than washed. That holds the shape of its owner's habitual posture. He was holding a manila folder against his chest with both hands, not the grip of concealment, the grip of something he wasn't ready to put down yet. He looked at Drummond for a long time. "You know who I'm," he said. Not a question. "I honestly know what access you had 14 months ago," Drummond said. "And I, to be fair, know what that access was connected to." The man's eyes moved to me. "Duty officer," I said, because it was the truest, simplest thing I could offer about myself in that moment. "He'll need to leave. He'll need to stay," Drummond said, with a quietness that didn't argue and didn't beg. Simply stated, the way you state, a condition of the weather. "Whatever you've brought in that folder, it goes into a record. It goes through him, or it goes nowhere." The man looked at the folder. The folder looked, in the corridor light, like it was heavier than its paper content could account for. I want to be accurate about what I felt in that moment, because I've spent considerable effort since trying to distinguish between what I felt and what I've retrospectively convinced myself I felt, and accuracy is the only virtue I've reliably managed to maintain in my career. I guess I felt afraid, not of the man. Plus, not of the door or what was behind it or the key in my pocket. Afraid of the specific shape of what was forming in front of me. The architecture of a situation that had been in progress long before I arrived, that had been waiting for a particular combination of people in a particular corridor, and that had, through whatever mechanic governs these things, arrived at me. Afraid that I was the record now, that Drummond had chosen me not because I was capable, but because I was present, and because he needed a witness, and that those two things were, lying in this building, on this night, the same. He'd been standing at the wrong end of the colonnade, facing the wrong direction, for however long it had taken him to understand what he was looking at. The man, he gave no name, and I noted no name, because he offered no name, and I was done speculating about what protocol applied to any part of this. Opened the folder on the narrow ledge of the wainscoting beside the door. Smoothed the top page with one flat palm. I stepped forward. Plus, the document was 2 pages. Dense type, a letterhead I recognized. Not the palace, not the household. A ministry I won't name here because I'm still employed and would like to remain so. A date stamp and an authorization signature. And beneath the signature, in the margin, in handwriting rather than type, 6 words. I read them once. I read them again. Drummond was watching me read them. He'd already read them. I understood that now. I understood the whole shape of the evening as a sequence of decisions he'd made one at a time, each one closing a door behind him until the only door left was this one. And he was watching to see what I'd do with the same 6 words. "He tried to reach you," I said. "Plus, Ashworth, 19 minutes of calls." "Yes." "And you knew, before he called, what was in that room." I suspected. "There's a difference. There's a very important difference," Drummond said. "And I suspect you understand why I waited to be certain before I stopped being where I was told to be." The man in the barber jacket was looking at the floor. He had the posture of someone who has carried something for a long time and has only recently been permitted to set it down, and isn't quite sure yet whether setting it down was a relief or an error. I picked up my pen, plus opened my log to a fresh page. Wrote the time, 22:23, and then stopped. Looked at Drummond. If I write this down, I said, it happened. Yes. And if Ashworth finds out I was here, he'll know you did your job. My job was to relieve you. Drummond said nothing, which was, of course, the answer, and I wrote the time. I wrote what I saw. I wrote the letterhead and the date stamp and the authorization signature and the 6 words in the margin, and I won't reproduce them here, not because I have been instructed not to, but because some records exist in a single copy for reasons that are more protective than concealing. When I finished, I capped my pen. The corridor was very quiet. The man, in my opinion, in the barber jacket picked up his folder and held it back against his chest. Looked at Drummond with an expression I couldn't name and still can't. Not gratitude, not relief. Something older than either of those. "They'll know you stayed," he said. "Good," Drummond said. And meant it. Why, in a way that cost him something I couldn't measure, and he clearly had no interest in displaying. Commander Ashworth arrived at 22:51. I know this because I wrote it down. I know most things about that night because I wrote them down, and writing them down is both the most useful thing I do and the thing that has, on exactly one prior occasion in my career, made someone very senior look at me with the specific expression of a man who wished I'd a different hobby. Ashworth walked the length of the East Colonnade at a pace that was technically not running. His shoes were the wrong shoes for the noise they were making, a formal pair, the kind you wear to things that don't expect you to walk fast, and the echo they produced got to me a full 4 seconds before he did. He had the look of a man who had been in the middle of something and had abandoned it at speed. His tie was still knotted but loosened. His right cuff was open at the button. He stopped 2 meters from Drummond, which he looked at me. Duty officer. Flat. Honestly, not hostile. The tone of kind of a man conserving energy for something he'd rather spend it on. "Sir, I issued a relief order at 21:48. "Yes, sir." "Sergeant Drummond is still on post." "Yes, sir." "Can you account for that?" I held my clipboard level, felt the weight of my pen in my other hand. I hold it when I'm not writing, have done for years. It is the quirk I was born with and the one I'll apparently die with. And I looked at Ashworth with the most neutral face I own. "I can account for it in writing, sir. Yes." Something shifted in his expression. A micro-adjustment. A man recalculating. He looked at Drummond. Drummond had not moved from the position he'd been in when I arrived. He was back at the near end of the colonnade, equidistant from both arches. The door behind him closed and locked. The key was still in my pocket, which I'd decided not to think about, standing with the particular stillness of someone who's conserving something. Actually, not energy. Drummond had plenty of energy. It was something more specific. The stillness of a man who has chosen his ground and isn't going to be shifted from it by noise or rank or the weight of someone else's expectations. Ashworth took 1 step toward him, which, "You were ordered off this post." "Yes, sir." "You declined." "I remained pending resolution of an unlogged entry, sir." "By whom?" A pause. The kind Drummond uses the way other people use punctuation, not to stall, but to place emphasis on what comes after. "By an individual using a cancelled access credential through an unregistered door." Ashworth's jaw tightened. Small. TBH. Controlled. The jaw of a man who has spent years learning to keep his face doing what he wanted instead of what it felt like doing. That is to be fair, matter for household security. Household security wasn't on post, sir. "You're not household security, Sergeant." "No, sir." And then, with the quietness that had characterized every word out of his mouth all evening, "But I'm still here." I want to describe for you the quality of the silence that followed because I have been in difficult meetings and difficult corridors and the specific atmosphere of a room in which someone has just said, the truest. Like a detonation, I've been in that one. 22nd of the month, 22nd of the year, 22nd of the century, 22nd of the millennium, 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 22nd of the century, 22nd of the month, 22nd of the year, 22nd of the century, 22nd of the millennium, 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 22nd of the century. A detonation, I've been in that one, 22nd of March last year, and it's a particular texture, a held breath quality, like air that knows what it's about to carry. This was the basically silence of a man being seen. Ashworth knew TBH, what was behind the door, so I understood this now with the certainty of something felt rather than deduced. The relief order issued specifically for Drummond, the 19 minutes of calls, the wrong shoes, at the wrong speed, at 22 minutes to 11 at night. He knew, had known, had issued the TBH order precisely because Drummond was the one man on. That colonnade who wouldn't simply look at an unregistered door and conclude it was none of his remit. And Drummond had kind of known that Ashworth knew, and had stayed anyway. Not in defiance, which that's the piece I keep, returning to, the piece I've turned over in my mind in the weeks since, and cannot reduce to anything simpler. There was no defiance in Drummond's decision, and defiance has heat in it, a current of resentment, of opposition, of I won't, because you won't make me. This was something colder and more structural than that. Drummond had assessed what the post required and had provided it. And full stop. The fact that a superior officer had ordered him away from that requirement didn't alter the requirement. The crown, not the commander. He actually had never stopped serving, which he had simply declined to serve incorrectly. Ashworth looked at my clipboard for a long time. You logged this? I logged everything, sir, which as is my function. From the beginning. From 2148, sir. He breathed in, out. A breath that was doing considerable administrative work. Oh, the individual who entered the service door has since departed through the same, sir. The folder was not left on the premises. Another breath. He pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. Not a gesture of defeat exactly. More the gesture of a man choosing between several versions of what comes next, and finding that some of them are no longer available. He turned to Drummond. You understand what you've done. I understand what I chose not to do. On, sir. There's a difference. There's a very important difference, Drummond said. And I heard, in the phrasing, the precise echo of what he'd said to me 4 minutes after I arrived. The smallest possible indication that he had rehearsed nothing tonight, that he had simply known what things were and said them. Ashworth looked at him for a long time, the look of a man computing the cost of several different futures simultaneously. Your report will be on my desk by 6 o'clock. Yes, sir. Full. Always, sir. Ashworth turned, walked back down the colonnade the way he'd come, at the same not-running pace, and the echo of the wrong shoes preceded him out of earshot. I stood with Drummond in the colonnade after. Neither of us moved immediately. The building settled around us with its pipes and its stone and its distance, doing what it always does at this hour. Which is, I think, to remind you that it's been here considerably longer than you, and will be here considerably after. My pen was in my hand, which it's always in my hand. You knew, I said, that logging it was the only protection you'd have. I knew logging it was the right thing to do, regardless of whether it protected me. And you chose me because I was on shift. He looked at me, the pewter eyes in the corridor light, the jaw with its old story of impact and continuation. I chose you, he said, because Costello told me you never skip a line. I stared at him. He had the grace not to explain it further. I filed my report at 5:43, 17 minutes ahead of the commander's deadline. I'm nothing if not consistent, which I included everything. The canceled credential, the unregistered door, the key, which I returned in a sealed envelope to the palace's property officer with no accompanying note, which is a statement of sorts. The 6 words in the margin of the document, and the arrival time, the departure time, the relief order, Drummond's decision, and my own. I filed it in triplicate, which 1 copy to Ashworth, 1 copy to basically the Household Security Archive. 1 copy, and I have never done this before in 6 years, with any document, folded into the breast pocket of my coat, where it remained for 11 days before I moved it to a location I'll describe only as not in this building. Drummond was reassigned 3 weeks later. Not disciplined. Reassigned. There's a difference, and it is precisely as important as every other difference in this story. He went to the North Post rotation, a senior billet, longer hours, higher exposure. The kind TBH of assignment that's either a reward or a very particular type of pressure, depending on what the person giving it wants you to understand about where you stand. I logged his reassignment at 9:14 on a Tuesday in February. Look, filed it correctly. Plus, closed the entry. Then I sat at my desk with my pen in my hand and thought about a man standing at the wrong end of a colonnade facing a door. that wasn't supposed honestly to be there, and about the 19 minutes of calls he'd let ring, and about the way he'd said, "I'm still here." Not as defiance, not as pride, but as simple, operational fact. Kind of, the Crown's Guard. Not the commanders. I thought about the 6 words in the margin, about who had written them, and when, and whether the person who had ordered Drummond's relief that night understood what those words were worth, or whether that was precisely why they'd ordered the relief. I picked up my pen, which opened a new page. For what it's worth, wrote nothing. For to be fair, the first time in 6 years, I held the pen and didn't write, because some things, once written, belong to whoever